Coming up in this episode.
The Alfa Romeo GTV6, yeah, it really is a standout favorite from the 1980s.
So we have some nice roads ahead of us here in the Belgian Ardennes.
Of course, Alfa Romeo, being Alfa Romeo, took the car racing. Welcome to another video here at Back to Classics. And I'm afraid I have petrol in my veins, as you can see by all the Ducati classic restorations that we have covered on this YouTube channel. But my passion goes far beyond only Ducatis, as I have a soft spot for many iconic motorcycles and cars of the 1970s, 80s and 90s, as can be viewed with this Alfa Romeo GTV6. Get ready for more excitement on this YouTube channel, as we will venture along into other motorcycle makes, but also feature classic cars more often. We'll be taking you along on this journey, my personal journey as a petrolhead, going to racing events, talking to interesting people in the classic motorcycle and car industry, as well as reviews and restorations of classic cars, and of course the beloved Ducati motorcycles that this channel is known for. We are excited to have you join us on this adventure, and we very much hope you like it as much as we like making these videos. So be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and especially make your comments in the section below, so we know exactly what you think of these videos and how we can improve on them in the near future. The first car to be featured on our YouTube channel is this 1981 Alfa Romeo GTV6, my very own car for that matter, which I bought back in 2006 already, so it's quite a long journey I've made with it. It was in quite a good condition at the time, but as things go, you tend to improve them. There were spots of rust appearing, which is why the complete body was redone and repainted back in 2018. A lot of other upgrades were made along the way, like the wheels that were sourced later on, the original wheels. Early Campagnolo wheels, correct for the 1981 early GTV6, as well as a recent big job that I did was to refit the gearbox. This time is a gearbox from an Alfa 75 3 liter with a limited slip diff, so a nice upgrade for this car, and a fresh new gearbox, and of course we adjusted the gear change mechanism as we went along with that. One of the weak points that we get to in a minute. But that was all done to the car, so I am very, very pleased with the current condition. Of course, this is a work in progress, as with any of these classic cars. So we're going to do minor upgrades and maintenance along the way that we will also feature on this YouTube channel in the future. The Alfa Romeo GTV6, yeah, it really is a standout favorite from the 1980s. This is an iconic Alfa Romeo, and it has won over countless car enthusiasts. Although it might not be the rarest, the fastest, or the most meticulously built car of its time, there is something about its soul that's just captivating. True to Alfa Romeo style, it connects you in a way that no other car really can. And it's that unique character that made it probably beloved back then, but is also the reason why it is so popular today.
The drivers hardly needed any introduction to motorsporting devotees. Formula One bound out.
This channel is known for its in-depth history lessons, so let's dive into the history behind the Alfa Romeo GTV6. And for that we have to go back to the 1970s, when Alfa Romeo had an existing lineup of cars, both coupes and sedans. And in Alfa speak, sedan is called a berlina and a coupe is called a GT. And this 105 series spanned from 1962 up to 1978. And featured a whole range of models, including the Giulia Berlina sedans and the sleek Bertone designed GT coupes. And these beauties were all powered by the same 4-cylinder twin-cam engine, now referred to as the Nord engine, in 1300, 1600, 1750 and 2-liter form. They were all fitted to these cars. Now on the sedans, Alfa Romeo at the time had two model ranges. One was the Giulia in 1300, 1600 cc variants with the same Nord engine, and there also was the larger sedan, the 1750 and 2000 Berlina. So by the early 1970s it was clear that the 105 series that came to an end and a whole new model range needed to be developed. And that became the Alfa Romeo Alfetta, But don't be fooled, because the Alfetta wasn't the immediate successor to the 105. Models like the Nuovo Giulia and the 750 and 2000 Berlinas kept rolling off the production line until the end of 1978. With that, Alfa was really stretching the lifespan of the old platform while the new one was gearing up. That new 116 Alfetta platform was a game changer for Alfa Romeo. And with the debut of the Alfa 1.8 Berlina in 1972, this was the first of the now famous transaxle models, and still powered by the all-aluminium 4-cylinder twin-cam Nord engine. So Alfa was very proud of their new transaxle design. It featured a De Dion rear axle with a Watts linkage, and the gearbox was mounted in the same structure. As a whole package, it was built underneath the car, and it meant that the gearbox could move to the rear of the car for ultimate weight distribution, and it also limits the unsprung weight of the outer wheels, because most of the linkages are all kept inboard inside the car. They even went so far as to fit the rear brakes on the side of the gearbox instead of in the rear wheel. Again, by doing that, Alfa Romeo tried to minimize the unsprung weight at the rear. Now, one of the advantages of this whole setup is that there is minimal camber change during travel suspension, especially when you compare it to an independent rear suspension that is often used today. Alfa was trying to strike a balance between a live rear axle, as the 105 series still had, without moving into fully independent rear suspension. And that is what this whole system is about. It really actually works very, very well, especially if you compare it with the other cars that were made in this era. The whole of that rear suspension setup, it takes some time to getting used to. When you first drive the car, you might feel that the body rolls, but actually when that happens, the rear axle stays planted to the asphalt in a very, very good way. So the level of grip is actually quite good and might surprise many people that are not used to this rear setup. So back to the history lesson after this technical intermission. The Alfetta Berlina models, they were still powered by the same 4-cylinder engine and were actually selling very well throughout the 1970s. Then in 1974, the Alfetta lineup got an extra boost in sales with the debut of the Alfetta GT Coupe. And this was designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro of Ital Design. Now, you might remember Giorgetto Giugiaro from other videos on this channel, because he also worked for Ducati. He was very instrumental in the design of the 860 GT in 1975, and he also came up with the new logo design of that same year. The Giorgetto Giugiaro styled GT Coupe was first introduced with the 1.8 version of that Nord engine, later to be followed in 1976 with a 2-liter version, which was called the Alfetta GTV. Now, GTV standing for Gran Turismo Veloce, or fast in Italian. At the same time, Alfa had even more plans, and that was for a large flagship sedan featuring a V6 engine. And Giuseppe Busso, who was the main chief designer at Alfa Romeo at the time, he designed a V6 engine specifically to be used in that large sedan. That new large sedan, it became the Alfa 6 or Alfa 6. And that was actually the first car to feature the now infamous Busso V6. Giuseppe Busso, he was a big fan of individual throttle bodies, who isn't? And he decided to fit that engine, that initial engine fitted to the Alfa 6, with 6 individual Veloto carburetors. I'm sure that was a breeze to adjust. The Alfa 6, it was a big leap forward for Alfa Romeo. Perhaps even a little bit too big, because taking up rivals as BMW and Mercedes-Benz, that proved to be a bridge too far. The press wasn't too enthusiastic about the Alfa 6, and also the sales figures, they weren't even close to what BMW and Mercedes-Benz were getting. With the Alfetta GTV on the market and the Alfa Romeo 6 not being as successful as they hoped, there were a few clever guys at Alfa Romeo at the time, and they thought, what if we take that V6 engine from the Alfa 6 and put it in the GTV? Well, what happened was exactly that. But they soon found out that that V6 engine, it did not fit under the bonnet. Because initially also Giuseppe Busso, he designed that V6 engine with the Dell'Orto downdraft carburetors that were stacked on top of the engine, making it impossible for the bonnet to close. So that the whole idea with the Dell'Orto downdraft carburetors, it may have been flawed from the start, and that is why it was a redesign was needed of the whole intake system and fuel system. And that was done with help of the famous firm Bosch that supplied the L-Jetronic injection system now for the first time on this Busso V6. So they also had to design the whole of the intake runners, the intake plenum that you see on top here, and the single throttle body that was now also fitted to this engine design. You might think that because they redesigned the whole of the intake manifold and intake plenum, that the bonnet would now still shut, but still it didn't. And that is why they had to make a power bulge on top of that bonnet in order for the V6 to be tucked underneath. So where the V6 wouldn't impress people or the press when it was fitted to the Alfa Sai, it really transformed the GTV into an absolute stunning vehicle. The GTV6 as it was called back in the day. The GTV6 was the first car that really made that Busso V6 so famous. It was in production until 2005 and it was still is being regarded as one of the best engines ever built by a car company. And the GTV6, the whole package with that rear axle design with the gearbox on the rear axle, ideal weight distribution, superb handling, and now combined with a V6 engine up front, that is what really made this car special. Even back in the day, it was regarded as a perfect attempt by Alfa Romeo to make a Gran Turismo sports car. Of course, Alfa Romeo, being Alfa Romeo, took the car racing. You might say it's similar to how Ducati always works. Racing is in the blood of these guys. So effectively it made a very good name for itself, both in touring car racing and in rallying. In British Touring Car Championship, Andy Rouse won the championship in 1983. And most famous, Yves Loubet drove the car to victory in the Tour de Corse rallying stage in 1986 and became third overall in the World Rally Championship. Plus, it won the Australian Rally Championship in 1987 with Greg Carr behind the wheel.
Greg Carr, Fred DeSantis, Alfa Romeo GTV6.
And it doesn't even stop there. The GTV6 was not just a charismatic driving machine and successful racer, it was also a Bond car. Yes, that's true, because in 1983 the film Octopussy came out, where James Bond showcases his refined taste by stealing a GTV6 and being pursued by German police in their pesky BMWs, all the while trying to save the world. Welcome to the interior of the GTV6. Now in here we see a lot of 1980s plastics, which is not the nicest, to be fair. But many of these cars in this era, they had this sort of plasticky feel to it. Yeah, it is typically correct for the 1980s. Switchgear as well, it feels a little bit flimsy. It's not the best quality, but again, that was only changed in the 1990s, actually, when the Germans especially upped their game and made for quality switches and quality materials used in car interiors. So what you find here is a typical 1980s dashboard here. Lovely wooden steering wheel, original to the early spec GTV6s like this is, as well as a wooden lever knob for the gear change. And we can go over the dials a little bit. So from left to right, we have the speedometer with odometer inside, all made by Veglia Electronic. And then we have the rev counter in the middle where it belongs, just like a Porsche. But an electronic rev counter as well, and a nice large clock to tell the time. And then we have in the middle console a few warning lights and the switch gear for the electric windows. All GTV6 models came with electric windows. And of course a fuel gauge, temperature gauge, oil pressure gauge. This car is fitted with an aftermarket sunroof.
which is operated with this switch. It's aftermarket. Alfa Romeo did not supply any options to this car, so that was fitted by the dealer back in the day. And then below that we have the temperature control with a fan, a 2-speed fan, one of the off position, with the air mix and the airflow. Then below that I have a period correct Philips radio fitted to the car. Of course, this being a Dutch car, Philips radio would be the way to go back in the day. And we have a nice storage area here, cigar lighter, and of course and one of the unique features on the GTV6 was the electronic mirror control for the left side. Cars were only fitted with the left mirror if they were left-hand drive, and right mirror if they were right-hand drive. I actually have both mirrors fitted, which is quite unique. I never saw another GTV6 with 2 mirrors fitted, but that's exterior exactly. The seats on the pre-facelift, so the pre-1983 models, are taken directly from the 105 Alfa GTV. It's exactly the same. And upholstery on this example is again aftermarket, but very nice tanned leather. Most of these cars were fitted with velour upholstery, but this one has the nice leather fitted to it. And then in the rear there is a way to sit down there. If you're very tiny or you have no legs, you can take your seat here. There are very nice bucket seats formed, but again, it's hardly possible to sit if you do have legs, which most people do have. Giugiaro, in all his wisdom, he designed the Alfetta GT as sort of a hatchback, but actually it really isn't. There is this hatchback tailgate opening like this, and then you have the advantage of reaching inside quite a large boot, but the rear seats do not fold down. In fact, this bulge here is where the fuel tank is, so there is limited space inside this car. Not too much to see under the bonnet apart from that glorious Busso V6 we already talked about. A huge bottle for the washer fluid with the sticker from the Alfa Romeo factory indicating what oil types you need. Then the expansion for the coolant system, your brake servo and master cylinder, and a air intake of course on this side with the air filter underneath. So we have some nice roads ahead of us here in the Belgian Ardennes, where we are for the upcoming video on the Bikers Classics as well. So let's see what this GTV6 is capable of here on these beautiful roads here in the Ardennes. Great handling car, the GTV6, especially on roads like these, because that, well, the big advantage of this car is really that great Busso engine that's in front. And to make advantage of that, long curves, and especially the roads like these with sweeps and bends and stuff, and that makes for a true gem of a bike. It really is a dream come true driving this car. Of course, it's limited a little bit by that rear axle that we talked about, the Dion rear axle, which makes for a little bit of body roll. But again, you have to compare it with its rivals from back in the 1980s. And many cars, if not all of them, they had an amount of body roll that will not be, well, accepted these days. But if you can work with that body roll, you have to remember that rear axle, it will stay planted throughout the corner. And that body roll, yeah, you have to take that into account, of course. But you have to bear in mind that all four wheels are always constantly on the tarmac. So beautiful handling car in that respect, and nothing to fear from that as long as you get to know the car a little bit better. Gearbox, that's another one of the weak points. Especially the gear change mechanism is not the best one ever designed on a car, especially not with a transaxle mounted gearbox. So that's something to be aware of. But again, if you get to know the car and you get to know that gearbox and how it changes gear, you get to know it and then you can really make use of it. One of the weak points of the GTV6 and exactly all transaxle Alfa Romeos is the gear change and the gear change mechanism. Now I spend a lot of time perfecting it on this car and it's as good as it can possibly be. So it's snappy enough to know in which gear you are. But as you can see, the gear change, well, it has some very long legs to turn and that is why it is not the perfect snappy gear change that you would expect from a sports car. But again, you have to live with it, and once you get to know the gear change and the gear change mechanism, it's very good to live with it, especially after spending so much time perfecting it the best as it can be. So that is something still worthwhile mentioning on the GTV6. Well, again, beautiful roads, beautiful car. So let's make some more kilometers here. As with any rear-wheel drive car of this era, you need to steer it with your throttle. Steering is a little vague in the middle position, but then you get a lot of information when you actually turn the wheel. But it's very reluctant to go around corners without that engine pulling the drivetrain. So you really have to put your foot down and take notice of that old saying, slow in, fast out. But that can also be said about that car that's right in front of us right now, that Westfield Lotus 7. Beautiful car. And a Renault 5 Turbo. How often do you see that? Around 24,000 GTV6s were built across its lifespan. Question mark remains as to how many of these still remain to this day. Rust was certainly an issue that killed many of them and sent them off to the junkyard. But you have to remember that was the case with all cars back in the day. They rusted because only until Audi started galvanizing the bodies of cars in the late 80s was that really not an issue anymore. Italian electronics might also be an issue on many of these cars, although it must be said the GTV6 is not known for any of these issues with electronics. Of course, things can happen, but again, these things happen on cars from back in that era. So let's discuss a little bit more of the pros and cons of this car. As we talked about, the gear change, that is really a weak point of this car. For some reason, Alfa Romeo, they did not design the gear shift linkage to the transaxle very well. It needs a lot of maintenance. You have to make sure that the bushes and the shaft is in very good condition to make it all work. It must be said, once you get to know the car and you get to get a feel with the gear change, it's very well to live with. It is just not one of the absolute things that stand out on the car, and you would expect a better job from Alfa Romeo in that department. Another point you could mention is the steering. It is a little vague in the middle position. But as soon as you turn it into a corner, the feel is there, absolutely. And once you feel the front tires gripping the road very well, and it gives a lot of feedback when cornering. It's just in that middle position that is just a little weak. Next to the steering being a little vague in the middle position, there is no power steering, which is fine as soon as the car is rolling. But when parallel parking, you don't have to go to the gym that often if you do that every day in this car. Well, you also mentioned the dashboard. Yes, it is made with some dreadful plastic and the switches are a little bit flimsy. But again, you need to live with that. It is how cars of this era are. Apart from it, the materials used, the dashboard is actually quite well laid out and good to spend your time behind. Another one of the weaker points, you might argue, about these plastic outer body trims, bumpers and the side skirts as well as the rear bumper. They're all made of plastic, but you have to remember again, in the 1980s it was the era of plastic fantastic. If you were a car manufacturer and you were to put this car on the road, with a chrome bumper, it would have been very, very old-fashioned. Now really, plastic was the way forward in 1981. But it's easy to point out what are the weak points on this car. Let's focus on what is truly amazing about this car. First, that stunning coupe wedge shape designed by Giugiaro. Then of course that phenomenal handling with that De Dion rear axle with the gearbox mounted on it, the front independent suspension, great steering, and last but not least, that glorious Buzo V6 engine in the front. Most importantly, however, it's this car's unique personality. Being an Alfa Romeo, this car has a character and a charisma that you will just not find on any other car. So that's about it, what we can tell about this great GTV6. We hope you very much like this first car video on this YouTube channel. If you do, please let me know in the subscriptions, in the blah de blah. And be sure to like and subscribe to this channel as well. We thank you very much for watching. Toodledokie, see you next time.